Welcome to Dead Quiet Mysteries, the place where every cold case, chilling crime, and unsolved mystery is brought back to life. From vanished persons to twisted betrayals, we dig deep into the unknown to uncover the truth that others left buried. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us which city and country you're watching from. We love seeing how far the mystery travels. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell icon so you never miss a case. Because here, some truths are only heard in the dead quiet. Hercule Poirot and the Portrait of Dorian Blane. Chapter 1. The Garden Party at Highmere Grange. The sky above Highmere Grange was a perfect polished blue, the kind of unbroken June heaven one might expect on the front of a postcard. Rows of marquees dotted the expansive lawn like frosted bonbons, each sheltering delicate finger sandwiches, gleaming trays of eclairs, and champagne that shimmered golden in the sunlight. Polite laughter floated on the air, occasionally punctuated by the soft rustle of silk gowns or the clink of porcelain teacups. Hercule Poirot, small, neat, and dressed immaculately in a dove-grey suit with a white carnation in his buttonhole, stood observing the party with his customary intensity. His moustache, waxed to perfection, twitched ever so slightly as he surveyed the well-groomed crowd. "You must forgive the spectacle, Monsieur Poirot," said Lady Eugenia Frobisher, tall, patrician, and wrapped in layers of lavender chiffon. "Dorian does so love a dramatic entrance." "Then let us hope, Madame," Poirot replied with a faint smile, "that his entrance is only dramatic and not melodramatic." Lady Eugenia chuckled lightly. "You don't know Dorian, monsieur. He thrives on the edge of theatricality." As if on cue, a ripple of murmurs spread through the guests. A liveried footman had positioned an easel beneath the grand oak near the terrace. Upon it was draped a rich crimson cloth. Then, with a sweep of his arm and a flourish that would not have embarrassed an opera conductor, Dorian Blane stepped forward. He was a striking man in his early 40s, with artfully greying hair, the tan of continental leisure, and eyes that sparkled with mischief. A silk scarf was knotted at his throat, and a signet ring flashed from one hand as he addressed the gathering. "Ladies and gentlemen, ladies," he announced, "you are about to witness the unveiling of a masterpiece. A work shrouded in legend, mystery, and perhaps even a touch of the macabre." Someone laughed nervously. Dorian whipped away the cloth. Beneath it was a painting, The Despairing Angel. The angel was not beatific, as one might expect, but tormented. Its eyes were wide with sorrow, arms stretched upwards in some mute plea. The background was a storm of burnt ochre and midnight blue, suggesting fire or ruin. It drew the eye, unsettling yet strangely beautiful. A hush fell. Even the birds seemed to pause in their song. Poirot stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. He did not like the painting, not because it was grotesque, he had seen worse in his years in Paris, but because it seemed to dominate the space unnaturally, as though it pulsed with secrets. Dorian turned to his audience with a grin. "Rumor has it this painting is cursed. Two of its previous owners met unfortunate ends, but I, mes amis, am not one to be frightened by whispers." Poirot met Dorian's gaze. There was bravado there, yes, but behind it something else, a flicker of unease. The rest of the party passed in genteel chatter, but tension curled beneath the surface like smoke. Poirot, moving through the groups with polite interest, took note of the other guests. There was Simon Blane, Dorian's cousin, and heir presumptive, a thin, hollow-cheeked man whose tailored jacket hung loosely on his frame. He seemed distracted, barely sipping his drink, eyes flitting toward Dorian with something close to resentment. Nearby stood Iris Lennox, a young woman in her late 20s, with a distracted air and a smudge of paint on the sleeve of her dress. She was an artist of rising reputation, and Poirot gathered she had recently been engaged in restoring some of Dorian's collection. She lingered near the painting longer than most, staring not at the angel's face, but at the bottom right corner, where a faint signature lay beneath a thick layer of varnish. Poirot also observed Mrs. Quayle, the housekeeper, who moved among the staff with military precision, but whose expression turned tight each time she passed near the painting. Finally, there was Colonel Burnham, a retired military man with a permanent squint and an upright bearing, who sipped whiskey and muttered darkly about foreign filth being passed off as art. That evening, as the last of the carriages rolled away, and the dying sun set the lawns ablaze with amber light, Poirot prepared to leave. But before he could bid farewell to Lady Eugenia, a shrill cry rang out from the terrace. It was Iris Lennox, pale and shaking, one hand gripping the balustrade. "It's Mr. Blane, his study, it's locked, but I heard something. I think it was a shot." Within moments, guests and staff converged outside the study door. Simon hammered his fist against the mahogany. "Dorian, are you in there? Open up." No answer. The butler fetched the spare key. As the door swung open, silence fell, then gasps followed. Dorian Blane sat slumped in his leather chair, a dark stain spreading across his white shirt. The dueling pistol from his antique wall rack lay on the carpet at his feet. The portrait of the angel still hung above the fireplace, but in the gathering gloom, its eyes, painted wide with despair, seemed now to stare directly at the corpse. Poirot stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "No one is to move," he said quietly. "From this moment, this room is not merely a scene, it is a story. And messieurs et mesdames, it is up to us to read the signs it offers." Outside, the wind had risen. The branches of the old oak scratched against the window pane like fingers. The despairing angel watched, and Hercule Poirot, the master of observation, knew this was no accident. It was murder. Chapter 2. A Death in Oils. The arrival of Inspector Cargill brought a brisk chill to the languid air of Highmere Grange, despite the lingering warmth of early summer. He was a lean man in his 40s, with quick eyes and a habit of tugging at the cuffs of his jacket whenever he grew impatient, a habit Hercule Poirot noticed at once. "Well, Monsieur Poirot," the inspector said, standing beside the lifeless figure of Dorian Blane, "we seem to have a very tidy case, locked room, single bullet wound to the head, and the pistol, presumably the murder weapon, lying right there." Poirot inclined his head slowly. "Very tidy, yes, but you will allow me perhaps to be a little dissatisfied with tidiness where it is most unwelcome." The study was a grand room, wood-panelled and lined with glass-fronted bookcases. Tall windows overlooked the lawn, now darkened by twilight. A heavy velvet curtain had been drawn, giving the room a claustrophobic feel. The only source of light came from the desk lamp, which cast long shadows across the body. Dorian's eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. His body was rigid in the high-backed chair, one hand curled slightly on the desk as though he had been about to write something. The other rested limply by his side. A glass of brandy, untouched, sat near the inkstand. Inspector Cargill stooped and lifted the pistol carefully. "Dueling pistol, flintlock, very antique, not your average weapon of murder." Poirot leaned closer to inspect the firearm, then examined the wall behind the chair. "There is no exit wound," he murmured. "The bullet is lodged perhaps in the skull or the chair. And you notice, mon ami, the absence of powder burns." "You're suggesting the shot came from a distance?" the inspector asked, frowning. "From more than a few feet, yes. A curious thing, no? In a room that was locked from the inside." Cargill stood. Then we must consider suicide. Blane closes the door, locks it, and shoots himself. Poirot's brow furrowed. Perhaps. But it is strange to me that a man planning to take his own life would pour a glass of brandy and then not touch it. Stranger still to choose such an elaborate method as a flintlock pistol, an item which must be loaded with care, aimed with effort, and fired with no certainty. Suicide, yes, but not a convincing one. The inspector sighed. You're not going to make this simple, are you? I seldom do, Poirot replied with a hint of amusement. They were joined by Lady Eugenia, her expression composed but her voice strained. Inspector, I must insist my guests be allowed to retire. It has been a terrible shock. Poirot gently raised a hand. May I suggest, madame, that none leave the house tonight? It is merely precautionary. One would not wish a shadow of suspicion to fall upon an innocent guest who chose to depart too hastily. Lady Eugenia hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Very well. I shall inform the staff. Poirot moved through the study, observing in silence. He bent down to examine the second glass on the desk. This one bore the faintest trace of lipstick. Interesting, he murmured. Our Monsieur Blane was not entirely alone this evening. He then turned to the fireplace. The despairing angel still hung above it, haunting the room with its desperate gaze. Poirot studied the painting for a long moment. There was something unsettling about the brushwork. A faint irregularity along the lower right edge. He touched it lightly, then stepped back. I believe this painting has been recently altered, not repainted entirely, no, but retouched, perhaps restored. The oils are fresh in places. Behind him, a voice said softly, I restored it last month. It was Iris Lennox, standing in the doorway, her hands clasped before her. Her dress had changed since the afternoon, but her eyes were still rimmed with tears. Poirot turned. You are an artist, mademoiselle? She nodded. I've worked with Dorian for years. He brought the painting from France. It was in poor condition, cracks, dirt, water damage. He asked me to restore it discreetly. He didn't want to alert anyone to the change in value. Change in value? Cargill asked, his ears perking. Iris hesitated. There was talk that it might be a long-lost piece by Jean Martel, a pre-war French symbolist. If authenticated, it would be worth a small fortune. Poirot tilted his head. So, Dorian believed he had found a treasure, and he was not a man who enjoyed sharing, I imagine. No, Iris replied softly. He was possessive. Brilliant, yes, but also dangerous. When he wanted something, he took it. The room fell silent. Simon Blane entered next, pale and drawn. He clutched a crumpled handkerchief and avoided looking at the body. I suppose you'll want to speak to me, he said dully. Indeed, said Poirot gently. Tell me, monsieur, did you see your cousin after the party ended? Simon hesitated. Briefly. I went to the library for a drink. I heard him enter the study. I didn't disturb him. We weren't particularly close. Poirot nodded. You will forgive the question, but did you benefit in any way from his, untimely death? Simon let out a bitter laugh. I would have. Until last week, Dorian changed his will. Inspector Cargill stepped forward. Changed it? To whom? Simon looked at Iris. To her. Iris's eyes widened. What? That can't be. He told me himself, Simon said coldly. Said he admired your artistic purity. Said you understood beauty in a way the rest of us did not. Poirot's gaze flicked between them. The tension was tangible. Just then Mrs. Quayle, the housekeeper, entered. Begging your pardon, sir, she said to the inspector. I thought I should mention... Mr. Blane received a letter yesterday. Looked foreign. He burned it in the drawing-room fireplace. I found part of the envelope." She handed over a charred piece of paper. The faint impression of the word Vienna was visible on the torn edge. Poirot's eyes glinted. "Vienna, that is significant. Tell me, madame, did Mr. Blane seem troubled after reading it?" Mrs. Quayle nodded. "He went very quiet, and he said something strange. He looked at that painting, then he said, 'The angel's eyes have seen too much.'" Poirot's fingers curled around the note fragment. His voice was quiet, deliberate. "Inspector, I believe this murder was not about inheritance alone. It was about something older, darker, something buried in that painting." Chapter 3. The Mirror and the Mask. The next morning at Highmere Grange dawned with deceptive calm. The birds sang, the sun cast long golden streaks across the gravelled paths, and the hedgerows stood still as if holding their breath. But inside the house, a subtle unease clung to every surface. Hercule Poirot, ever precise, descended the staircase with the poise of a man who had spent the night in focused thought rather than troubled sleep. He was met by Inspector Cargill, who stood by the breakfast sideboard with a cup of tea in one hand and a furrow in his brow. "Morning, monsieur. You are up early, I'm told," Cargill said. "I do not sleep long when the puzzle is half finished," Poirot replied, brushing a non-existent speck from his sleeve. "I prefer to let the little grey cells work in silence." The inspector gestured towards the window, where the reflection of the despairing angel could be faintly seen in the hallway glass across the room. "That painting gives me the creeps. Looks like it's keeping watch over us all." Poirot glanced at it. "Indeed. And perhaps it is. One must always consider what the eyes of a painting might have seen, especially when someone dies beneath them." Leaving the inspector to his tea, Poirot moved quietly to the study. The room had been cordoned off since the discovery of Dorian's body. Though the corpse had been removed, the sense of finality lingered. Poirot moved to the painting. He took out a small magnifying glass and examined the lower corner, where he had noticed the varnish was uneven. He pressed gently at the canvas edge. It gave, slightly, a minute warping in the frame. From his coat pocket, Poirot produced a pair of gloves and a tiny scalpel. With delicate precision, he slid the blade along the seam. A thin sliver of canvas peeled back. Underneath the angel's painted wing, a second signature emerged, faint but legible. "A. Holtzmann, I 9013. "Holtzmann," Poirot whispered, "not Marté." He let the canvas fall back in place, thoughtful. The supposed French symbolist masterpiece was not French at all, a forgery or a deliberate deception. He was interrupted by a knock. Iris Lennox stood at the door, hesitant. "I didn't want to intrude, Monsieur Poirot. I heard you were in here." "Come, mademoiselle," he said gently. "Tell me, when you restored this painting, did you notice any irregularities?" She nodded slowly. "The paint was thick in places it shouldn't have been. I assumed someone had tried to cover damage, but the layers didn't match. And I never saw that second signature." Poirot gestured to a chair. "Sit, let us speak openly." Iris sat, hands twisting in her lap. "Dorian was obsessed with the painting. He bought it at a private sale in Paris last year. He never said from whom. He had it shipped here and ordered me to begin restoration at once, in secret." "Did he say why?" "He claimed it would be his greatest triumph, that when it was authenticated, it would change everything." Poirot studied her face. She was earnest, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes. Regret? Or fear? "You cared for him?" "I admired him. Once. He was brilliant, but dangerous. He knew how to control people. He made you feel seen, but always through a lens of his own making. Poirot nodded. You painted him, did you not? I did. But I destroyed the portrait months ago. I couldn't bear to look at it. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Are you certain it was destroyed? Iris blinked. Of course, I burnt it. Poirot said nothing, but made a small mental note. Later that morning, he sought out Simon Blane. The younger man was in the conservatory, staring into the glassy green of the ornamental pond. He looked drained, as though the very act of being upright cost him dearly. You believe I killed him? Simon said without preamble. I believe many things, Poirot replied. But beliefs are not proof. Simon gave a mirthless laugh. You want proof? Dorian ruined my life. My father left him everything. Dorian promised he would make me his heir, but he never respected me. I was just convenient. Convenient enough to frame. Simon turned, eyes narrowing. I see. You think I staged the whole thing. But I never touched that pistol, Monsieur Poirot, and I had no idea he'd changed his will until last night. Poirot raised a brow. Do you know why he changed it? Simon hesitated. Because he wanted Iris. She'd become his new obsession. Poirot leaned forward slightly. And you resented that? Simon gave no answer. Later, Poirot wandered the corridors of Highmere Grange. The house had the feel of a place pretending at grandeur, rooms over-decorated, too carefully curated. But it was the upstairs east wing that intrigued him most. There he came across Mrs. Quayle, briskly dusting a cabinet filled with porcelain figurines. She looked up as he entered. Back again, sir? I never truly left, Poirot said with a smile. Tell me, Mrs. Quayle, was there ever a time when guests stayed in the East Wing? Not since Miss Evelyn, she replied, then paused. Poirot's head tilted. Evelyn? Lady Eugenia's daughter, drowned 5 years ago. Such a shame. Beautiful, full of life. Dorian was quite taken with her back then. Poirot walked slowly to the end of the corridor. A room stood ajar. Inside, dust sheets covered the furniture, but on the dresser stood a silver hand mirror, clean of dust. He picked it up. A faint smear of lipstick marred the glass. He turned to Mrs. Quayle. Tell me, madame, has anyone been in this room recently? She hesitated. Not officially, but sometimes at night. I hear creaks, a door closing. I thought it was just old pipes, but now... Poirot set the mirror down. A locked study, a lipstick-marked glass, a painting with 2 names, and now a room, long abandoned, holding signs of life. As he returned to the main hallway, Poirot's eyes flicked once more to the despairing angel. Its gaze seemed no longer sorrowful but knowing. The mask was beginning to slip. Chapter 4. The Legacy of Blane. By late afternoon, a brooding hush had fallen over Highmere Grange. Rain began to pepper the windows, turning the manicured lawns into muted blurs. Inside, the air was heavy with the kind of silence that arrives only after death and before the storm of truth. Hercule Poirot stood by the fireplace in the drawing-room, his hands clasped behind his back, observing the guests as they gathered under Lady Eugenia's request. His eyes rested on each person in turn. Simon, slouched in a faded armchair, brooding and tight-lipped. Iris Lennox, perched uncomfortably near the window, twisting the hem of her sleeve. Colonel Burnham, rigid and silent, his jaw clenched. And Lady Eugenia herself, seated upright, her gloved hands folded over a silver-topped cane. The arrival of Mr. Erskine, Dorian's solicitor, injected a faint rustle of anticipation. He was a prim, pink-faced man with the expression of one constantly apologizing for something he had not done. I suppose we might as well get this over with, he murmured, unfolding a series of neatly typed documents. Mr. Dorian Blane revised his will only 10 days ago. I was summoned here privately to witness it, alongside Mrs. Quayle, if memory serves. The housekeeper, standing by the sideboard, gave a slight nod, but said nothing. Erskine cleared his throat. To Mr. Simon Blane, cousin and former heir, Dorian left nothing. Simon did not flinch, but his hand tightened on the armrest. To Lady Eugenia Frobisher he bequeathed the sculpture of Apollo and all personal correspondence between their families. Hardly generous, Lady Eugenia muttered. To Colonel Burnham, his grandfather's military sword, in respect for years of family friendship. The Colonel blinked, but gave no reaction. And to Miss Iris Lennox, Erskine paused, glancing up. The entirety of the art collection, including The Despairing Angel and Hymir Grange itself. There was a beat of stunned silence. I can't accept that, Iris whispered. It must be a mistake. It is no mistake, Erskine said quietly. He signed it with full awareness. Simon rose abruptly. This is madness. She's an employee, a restorer. Dorian barely knew her. Poirot's voice, calm and precise, broke the tension. Oh, but he knew her very well, Monsieur Simon. Perhaps too well. Admiration for beauty can quickly become obsession. Simon turned, fury mounting. And you think that's motive enough for me to kill him? Because he left everything to her? Poirot did not answer. Instead, he turned to Mr. Erskine. Tell me, monsieur, was there anything unusual about Dorian when you last saw him? Erskine frowned. Now that you mention it, yes. He was nervous, distracted. He kept looking at the painting, The Despairing Angel, said something about it holding secrets. I thought he meant symbolically, but... Poirot nodded. Did he mention a letter from abroad? Ah, yes. There was a letter from Austria, arrived 2 days before I came. He was agitated after reading it. I offered to take it for safekeeping, but he said he would handle it himself. Did you see the letter? Only the envelope. It was from Vienna. Poirot turned to Mrs. Quayle. You said he burned it. I found bits in the grate. It was still warm when I emptied the ashes. Poirot's voice dropped a shade. Madame, did you read the return address? Mrs. Quayle hesitated. Only a name. Frobisher. Gasps followed. All eyes turned to Lady Eugenia, whose lips had parted slightly. Her face turned an ashen shade beneath the powder. Impossible, she whispered. My daughter died 5 years ago. Poirot stepped forward. That is what everyone believes. But I think, madame, you suspected otherwise. Her chin lifted. There was never a body, only the wreckage of the boat. Evelyn was always impulsive, theatrical. There were moments when I wondered. Poirot walked slowly toward the mantelpiece. Dorian received a letter signed by your daughter. He burned it in panic. Later that day, he changed his will. That same night, he was murdered. Simon scoffed. You're chasing ghosts now, Monsieur Poirot. I do not believe in ghosts, monsieur, Poirot said softly. But I do believe in secrets. And this house is full of them. Later that evening, Poirot visited the gallery room where Dorian had displayed his finest pieces. The storm outside had grown louder, rain lashing the tall windows. Alone among the portraits and sculptures, Poirot walked slowly past the frames, stopping before a painting partially veiled with muslin. He drew it back. It was a portrait of a young woman, blonde, serene, her features fine and eerily familiar. Evelyn. The signature read I.L. He heard a step behind him. Iris Lennox stood in the doorway, pale but steady. You found it? She said. Poirot did not turn. You painted her. She came to me, Iris said, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 months ago, she said she needed help. She didn't explain why she was alive, only that she wanted Dorian to think she was gone. She begged me to paint her, so she'd be remembered differently. A final image, one that was hers, not his. Poirot turned to face her. And you agreed? I owed her that much. Poirot looked again at the portrait. There was strength in Evelyn's eyes, melancholy, but defiant. When did Dorian see this? He never did. I hid it before he returned from France. Poirot exhaled. Then the question is, how did Evelyn reappear in his life again? Was she blackmailing him or trying to escape him once more? In a sudden gust of realization, Poirot's expression sharpened. He turned to Iris. I must ask you one final question. When you restored the despairing angel, did you notice a change in Dorian's behavior afterwards? Iris nodded slowly. He became paranoid. He told me once the angel had begun to watch him, that it knew what he had done. And what? Poirot asked quietly. Had he done? Iris's eyes flickered. I don't know, but I think he killed someone a long time ago, and the painting reminded him. As thunder cracked above the manor, Poirot straightened his cuffs. One thing is now clear, mademoiselle. This is no ordinary murder. It is the final act of a very old play, and the curtain is not yet down. Chapter 5. Shadows in the Studio. The storm had passed by morning, but its aftermath lingered. Dew clung to the hedgerows, and branches littered the gravel drive like broken sentences from an interrupted conversation. Inside Highmere Grange, the atmosphere remained subdued, voices hushed, movements cautious. Hercule Poirot, after a light breakfast of brioche and black coffee, requested directions to Iris Lennox's studio. It was not part of the main house, but a small, ivy-draped outbuilding tucked beyond the rose garden. Once a gamekeeper's lodge, it now served as her sanctuary, part artist's retreat, part private world. The door was unlocked, as if awaiting him. The space was modest and cool. Light filtered through high windows streaked with rain. A faint smell of linseed oil and turpentine hung in the air, not unpleasant, but sharp. Canvases leaned against every wall, some complete, others no more than vague swaths of colour. A half-finished portrait stood on the central easel, a man's face, sharp-featured, with eyes that refused to settle. Poirot recognized Dorian Blane at once. He turned slowly, examining the room with forensic care. Sketchbooks sat open on a cluttered table. One page bore the rough outline of a pistol. Another, more strikingly, showed a woman's face, half-shrouded, mouth parted in silence. Evelyn? Poirot's gaze drifted to a narrow shelf against the wall. Among the jars of brushes and tubes of paint stood something decidedly out of place. A second flintlock pistol. It was nearly identical to the one that had killed Dorian. Poirot picked it up delicately. It was not a prop. It had weight, fine engraving on the barrel, and faint soot within the muzzle. Though not recently fired, it was no imitation. Looking for something? Poirot turned calmly. Iris Lennox stood at the door, coat wrapped tightly around her. Her cheeks were pale, her eyes watchful. "Forgive me, mademoiselle," Poirot said smoothly. "I was curious about your creative process. I did not expect to find weaponry among the brushes." Iris approached, arms folded. "It's not loaded. It was a gift from Dorian. He said it would help me understand the romance of danger." Poirot arched an eyebrow. "A peculiar token, no? Especially from a man who was later shot with its twin." "I never touched the other one," she said quickly. "The pistol in the study, he always kept it above the fireplace. It was part of the collection." Poirot placed the pistol gently back on the shelf. "Did you know there were two?" "I suspected. Dorian often bought things in pairs. He said symmetry was more truthful than singularity." Poirot turned to the portrait of Dorian on the easel. Why paint him now? Iris looked away. I didn't mean to. After he died, I just started. It was like the image forced its way out. He moved closer, examining the canvas. The likeness was precise, but something in the expression jarred. It was not pride nor malice, but fear. Poirot studied the background, a half-formed shadow behind the figure's shoulder, indistinct but suggestive of wings. You have given him the angel's watcher, Poirot murmured, or perhaps his judge. Iris did not reply. I must ask, Poirot said gently, why Evelyn Frobisher came to you and not her mother. She said she couldn't face her family, not after what she'd done. What had she done? She didn't say, Iris whispered. But it wasn't guilt about the faked death. It was something else. Something involving Dorian. Poirot nodded slowly. Tell me, mademoiselle, did she ever enter the house? Return to Highmere itself? A pause, then, once. I didn't see her go in, but I found her crying outside the east wing one night. She said nothing, just that she had seen something she wished she hadn't. And when was this? 3 nights before the garden party. Poirot turned to the window. The rain had started again, tapping lightly against the glass. The details were forming a pattern, but the image remained elusive, like a picture drawn too close to the eye. That afternoon, Poirot returned to the study. He examined the dueling pistol once more, confirming his suspicion. It was not fired from close range. The absence of powder burns supported this. The murder had required precision, planning, and, crucially, access to both pistols. From the hallway, Colonel Burnham appeared, hands clasped behind his back. You don't believe she did it, do you? He asked, motioning toward the window, where Iris could be seen walking through the rain. She's too soft, too inward. Many artists are inward, Colonel. That does not preclude the possibility of outward action, Burnham harumphed. Well, I don't trust Simon, never have. Dorian mocked him, yes, but Simon stewed. Quiet resentment is far more dangerous than open hatred. Poirot turned. You knew Dorian well? Well enough. He had charm but no conscience, and a taste for power. He enjoyed collecting things, art, secrets, people. Poirot studied the Colonel. And what of Evelyn? You were fond of her, yes? Burnham's face clouded. She was like a niece to me, bright but haunted near the end. There was something between her and Dorian. I never asked. Poirot nodded. And the day of her disappearance? She went sailing, alone supposedly. The boat was found smashed on the rocks. Her shawl was discovered near the cliffs. Everyone assumed the worst. But you never truly believed she died. The Colonel looked away. Number, I knew her better than that. Poirot stepped closer. Then I must tell you something, Colonel. She is alive, and someone tried to ensure she stayed hidden. Burnham's expression darkened. And now Dorian is dead. Indeed, Poirot said quietly, because someone realized the past could not remain buried, and Evelyn, poor Evelyn, was about to uncover something no one wanted her to remember. That night, Poirot stood again before the despairing angel. The paint still glistened faintly under the lamplight. He traced its gaze toward the empty chair where Dorian had died. 2 pistols, 2 sisters, 1 living, 1 vanished. 2 portraits, 1 public, 1 private. The symmetry of deceit. And still the question hung in the air. Who had fired the fatal shot? Chapter 6. The Angel's Gaze. The dawn broke sullen and grey over Highmere Grange. A low mist crept across the grounds like a prowler too cautious to be seen. Inside, a different kind of fog lingered, one of apprehension, of unspoken truths hanging like dust motes in the stillness. It was Mrs. Quayle who found him. Colonel Burnham lay sprawled across the floor of the garden shed, barely conscious, his coat torn, a cut above his temple oozing blood. The rake beside him was splintered at the handle, and a broken lantern smouldered in the corner. Poirot arrived within minutes, summoned by a breathless footman. He knelt beside the colonel, examined the wound with care, and spoke softly. "Can you hear me, Colonel?" "It is Poirot." Burnham groaned, blinking slowly. "It was someone behind me. I didn't see. I had just gone to fetch that blasted photograph." "What photograph?" Burnham's fingers clenched weakly. "The one I found in the drawer. Evelyn and Dorian." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "You found a photograph of them together?" Burnham gave the slightest nod before slipping back into unconsciousness. Poirot stood, face grave. "Call the doctor," he said crisply, "and send someone to search this shed. We must find that photograph." But by the time the constables arrived, the photograph was gone. Only a partially burned scrap remained in the iron grate at the back of the shed, charred at the corners, but still revealing a pair of clasped hands. One bore a ring, an ornate silver band with the Frobisher family crest. Lady Eugenia confirmed it. "It was Evelyn's. My mother gave it to her on her 21st birthday. I've not seen it since the day she vanished." Poirot held the fragment between gloved fingers. "Then it is as I feared. Dorian had proof Evelyn lived, and someone is now desperate to destroy that proof." Lady Eugenia paled. "Do you think she's still here, at the house?" Poirot gave no answer. Instead, he returned to the east wing, to the abandoned bedroom, where he had first noticed the uncharacteristically clean mirror. A faint trail of damp footprints led from the French doors to the wardrobe. There he found what he was looking for, a small valise hidden beneath old linen. Inside were a woman's clothes, a book of poetry, and a sealed bottle of sleeping draught. And, tucked inside the book, a letter, unsent and unaddressed. "I should never have trusted him. He promised it would stay buried, but he kept the photograph, and now he means to use it. I know what happened on the boat, and I know why he lied. If I do not return, know that I tried. Forgive me." The signature at the bottom was faded, but unmistakable. Evelyn Frobisher. Poirot sat down, the weight of the truth settling slowly. The boat accident had been no accident. Evelyn had disappeared to hide something Dorian held over her. And now that she had tried to return, someone was determined to silence her for good. Poirot made his way to Iris Lennox's studio once more. He found her standing in the open doorway, her expression unreadable. "She was here last night," Iris said before he could speak. "Evelyn. She came just after midnight. She looked frightened, said she couldn't stay, that she had to leave again." "Did she say where she was going?" Iris shook her head. "Only that she feared the portrait had betrayed her." Poirot stepped inside. "Which portrait?" Iris pointed to the corner where a canvas rested covered in brown cloth. Poirot pulled it back gently. It was a second painting of the despairing angel. But this one was different. The angel's face was turned slightly to the side, not toward heaven but downward. And in the corner of the canvas, just beneath the golden wing, was a hidden figure painted in the shadows, a man, barely distinguishable, clutching something in his hands, a camera. Poirot inhaled sharply. So the original painting was not merely symbolic, it was a witness. The artist had hidden Dorian in the background. "I only noticed it during restoration," Iris whispered. "I didn't know what it meant. But Evelyn saw it immediately. She said it proved he had watched her, perhaps even taken something from that night on the cliffs." Poirot's voice dropped. "He was blackmailing her." "Yes, Poirot's mind reeled. If Dorian had blackmailed Evelyn using the threat of exposure, perhaps claiming she had been responsible for someone's death, or had been present during some unspeakable event, it would explain why she faked her drowning, and why she returned now to stop him from doing it again. And yet someone else had been one step ahead. Colonel Burnham had found the photograph. He had been attacked for it. Evelyn had returned to confront Dorian. Now she had vanished once more. And Iris? Was she protector or pawned? Poirot turned to her. Mademoiselle, there is one final thing I must ask. The night Dorian died, you said you heard a shot, but you did not come immediately. She looked at him, startled. No. I froze. I didn't know what I heard. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Then why did you run to the terrace so quickly? You were the first to call for help. I don't know. Instinct? Or guilt? She stepped back. I didn't kill him. No, Poirot said softly. But you may know who did. He left her in the silence and returned to the study. The angel on the wall remained unmoved. Its sorrowful gaze looked no less accusatory. But Poirot now understood it was not just a painting, it was the final testament of a secret long buried, one that someone was willing to kill for. Chapter 7. The Little Grey Cells at Work. The library at Highmere Grange had become Poirot's sanctuary, a place where the fire crackled gently and silence permitted thought to take root. It was here, seated in an armchair beneath the oil portrait of a long-forgotten ancestor, that he let his little grey cells perform their elegant work. Outside, the weather had turned bitter again. A steady drizzle kissed the windows and blurred the ivy-covered walls. Inside, Poirot laid out a series of seemingly unrelated items on the desk before him: the burned photograph fragment, with Evelyn's ringed hand, the second flintlock pistol found in Iris's studio, the unsent letter hidden inside a volume of Keats, and a copy of the will in which Dorian had disinherited Simon. Each piece was incomplete in itself, but together they formed a peculiar symmetry. That symmetry, Poirot knew, was no coincidence. He rang the bell. A moment later, Mrs. Quayle entered, her face drawn with worry. "Madame," Poirot said gently, "I require your assistance." She nodded. "Of course, monsieur. I need a quiet word with Simon Blane, alone, and if you could also send Iris Lennox here, but only after I have finished with Simon." Mrs. Quayle inclined her head. "Very good, sir." Simon entered 5 minutes later, his gait stiff, his face pale but defiant. Poirot gestured to a chair. "Please, Monsieur Simon." Simon sat but did not relax. "You're going to accuse me now, I suppose." "I accuse no one, monsieur," Poirot replied mildly. "I simply observe, and I wonder aloud, what kind of man inherits nothing and yet stays?" Simon's jaw twitched. "I've nowhere to go." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "I wonder if that is true, or if you remained because you knew something, or worse, feared someone." Simon's silence was telling. Poirot continued softly. "You were not in the library the night Dorian died, were you?" Simon looked up sharply. "What are you talking about? Of course I was." Poirot tapped a finger on the desk. "No ash in the tray, no scent of smoke, and you are a chain smoker. You claimed to be there out of habit, yet nothing supports your presence. What were you really doing?" Simon swallowed, colour draining from his face. I was in the corridor near the east wing. I'd seen someone go into that old bedroom. I thought I was seeing things. I followed." Poirot nodded. "And you found Evelyn?" Simon nodded slowly. "She didn't recognize me at first. She looked ill, afraid. Said Dorian had something that could ruin her, and that he meant to use it." Poirot's eyes glinted. "And you thought you could protect her?" "I don't know. Maybe. I told her to leave, to stay away from him. But I couldn't stop it." Did you see her again that night? Simon hesitated. Number only heard the shot. Poirot said nothing more. Simon stood abruptly and left. Moments later, Iris Lennox entered, visibly tense. "I've been thinking," she said, "that you already know." Poirot gestured for her to sit. "What is it you believe I know, mademoiselle?" "That I helped Evelyn hide. That I painted her portrait knowing Dorian would have wanted to see it. That I restored the angel painting, not realizing it would lead to this." "You think you were the catalyst," Poirot said gently. "But you are not the killer?" Iris let out a small breath. "Then who is?" Poirot stood, smoothing his waistcoat. "That, mademoiselle, is why I must ask everyone to gather in the drawing room. The time has come to end the masquerade." That evening, the household assembled beneath the mournful gaze of the despairing angel once more. The fire crackled. The storm had returned, tapping against the window panes like a reminder of nature's impatience. Poirot stood near the hearth, hands behind his back. "My friends," he began, "we have been dancing with shadows, lies, half-truths, omissions, all circling one very simple question. Who killed Dorian Blane?" He paused, letting his gaze pass across each face. At first glance it appeared a locked room mystery, but that, mes amis, was an illusion. The room was not sealed, the key was accessible, the pistol was not unique, and there was no suicide note. Simon frowned. Iris stared at the fire. Lady Eugenia looked stricken. Colonel Burnham, seated now but bandaged, remained still. Poirot continued. "We know that Dorian Blane was a man who collected secrets. He possessed a photograph proving Evelyn Frobisher was alive. He threatened her with exposure. But it was not the photo that made her return, it was the painting. The despairing angel, once believed a symbolist masterpiece, was in fact a hidden testimony. Within it, a figure. Dorian himself was painted holding a camera, a detail only the restorer would have uncovered. Iris blinked. "I never told him." "No, but someone else saw it, someone who realized what it meant, and that person killed Dorian before he could use either the painting or the photograph against Evelyn, or, perhaps, against others." Poirot turned. "I accuse not Iris, not Simon, not Colonel Burnham, who tried to protect Evelyn, not even Lady Eugenia, who lived with guilt, but not malice." He faced the final guest, stepping out from the doorway. Evelyn Frobisher. Gasps filled the room. She was pale, gaunt, but her eyes were clear. Poirot bowed his head. "You may enter, mademoiselle. The charade is over." Lady Eugenia rose but did not speak. Poirot turned back to the room. Evelyn did not kill Dorian. She came to plead with him, but someone overheard. Someone who realized the game was up. He raised a hand. "The killer is here. And tomorrow, I shall prove it." A stunned silence followed. Poirot adjusted his cufflinks. "I thank you all for your patience. Sleep well, if you can, for in the morning the truth shall be revealed." And with that, the little Belgian detective turned and walked into the shadows, leaving the angel to keep its sorrowful vigil one final night. Chapter 8. The Portrait of the Killer. The rain had stopped by morning, but a damp chill lingered in the drawing room of Highmere Grange. The fire had not yet been lit, and the windows remained grey with condensation. The guests, no longer merely guests, but suspects, witnesses, survivors, gathered in tense silence as Hercule Poirot stood before the hearth. He was, as ever, immaculate, black suit pressed, shoes polished to a mirror shine, moustache sculpted like a work of art. Only his eyes betrayed the intensity beneath the surface, sharpened like a surgeon's blade, poised for the final incision. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice crisp, Thank you for assembling. This house, like all grand houses, has been full of ghosts. But unlike most, it has also harbored secrets, secrets that, when revealed, led directly to murder." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room. "Let us begin, as I so often do, with motive." Dorian Blane was a collector, not merely of paintings, but of power. He knew Evelyn Frobisher had survived the boating accident she herself staged. He held evidence, a photograph proving her survival, and perhaps implicating her in events she could never publicly explain. But Dorian did not wish to expose her out of malice. Number, he wished to control her, as he controlled others. Evelyn, seated quietly beside Lady Eugenia, lowered her head. Poirot continued. The painting, The Despairing Angel, concealed a figure, Dorian himself, painted holding a camera. He was present the night Evelyn vanished, and possibly involved in the events that led her to flee. Iris Lennox, in restoring the painting, uncovered that figure, though she did not understand its full significance. He turned toward Iris, who met his gaze squarely. "You are innocent of the crime, mademoiselle. You acted out of trust, but someone else understood, someone who realized that the painting and Dorian's possession of the photograph placed them in danger." Poirot walked slowly to the fireplace, gesturing toward the pistol mounted on the wall. The dueling pistol that killed Dorian was only one of a pair. The second was found in Iris's studio, but it had not been fired. The murderer used Dorian's own weapon, ensuring that suspicion would fall either upon Iris, the restorer, or Simon, the disinherited heir. Simon, seated with arms folded, gave a sharp nod. "So who was it then?" Poirot turned, his eyes cool. "To answer that, we must consider opportunity. Who had access to the study that evening? Who had reason to keep Evelyn silent, and Dorian too?" He took a breath. Colonel Burnham found the photograph. He intended to expose the truth, but was struck from behind before he could do so. This was not a random act of violence. It was deliberate, and the person who attacked him knew exactly what he had discovered. Burnham stirred, his bandaged head bowed. Poirot stepped forward. "So we come to the one who had motive, means, and above all, fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of a past returning." He turned sharply. "The murderer is Simon Blane." The room seemed to freeze. Simon stared at Poirot, stunned. "What? That's absurd." "Is it?" Poirot's voice remained calm. "You told us you were in the library when the shot was fired, yet the ashtray showed no signs of your habitual smoking. You claimed to have heard the shot, yet ran to the scene before anyone else. Why? Because you had just fired that very shot." Simon's face darkened. "I went to the study after I heard Iris scream." "Number Iris did not scream until after she saw you standing at the study door. The order is important. You arrived first, and you used the key taken earlier from the butler's drawer to make it appear the door was locked from the inside." Poirot turned to the rest of the room. Simon had reason to kill Dorian, yes, he had been disinherited, but that was not his only motive. Years ago, Simon and Dorian had collaborated in an art fraud scheme. Together they commissioned a forged version of The Despairing Angel and passed it off as a lost Marte. They split the profits until Dorian bought back the painting and began to suspect that the forgery concealed something else. Poirot pointed toward the painting. When Iris began her restoration, she uncovered the hidden figure. Dorian realized the truth, that Simon had used the painting not just for money, but to hide evidence. Dorian began to threaten Simon, implying he would expose both crimes. So Simon acted. He murdered Dorian, attempted to frame Iris, and then tried to silence Colonel Burnham when the photograph resurfaced. Simon stood suddenly. "You can't prove any of that." Poirot lifted a single brow. No? You forget I asked the local police to dust the flintlock pistols for fingerprints. The results arrived this morning. Your prints were on the pistol from the study and on the lockbox in the butler's drawer where the spare key was kept. Simon's face turned grey. Poirot took a step closer. The angel's eyes, monsieur, saw too much. But it was not the painting that betrayed you. It was your own fear. There was silence, then the sound of a heavy exhale. Simon sat back down, shoulders sagging. He deserved it. Dorian ruined everything. Evelyn, the inheritance. He couldn't leave anything alone. He always came back to twist the knife. Poirot gave a small, sad nod. That may be. But justice, monsieur, is not yours to serve. As the constables entered, Simon was led away without protest. Poirot turned to Evelyn, who was trembling. You are free now, mademoiselle. Your past no longer binds you. She whispered, Thank you. Poirot inclined his head. Outside, the sun finally broke through the mist, casting a pale gold light across the lawn. The painting still hung above the fireplace, but now its gaze seemed softer, less like a warning and more like a farewell. Poirot looked at it one last time and whispered, Even angels, when painted by man, can carry the weight of his sins. And with that, Hercule Poirot gathered his coat, adjusted his hat, and departed Highmere Grange, leaving truth in his wake and silence behind him.